Let's get started. Welcome to Microsoft Ignite. My name is Joshi Joseph. I'm from Office 365 Core Product Engineering team.
And my name is Brian Day. I'm from Office 365 Enterprise Cloud Complex Orgs.
Yeah, today we are going to talk about Office 365 data centers, how we store customer data, especially around the data residency. We'll also talk about Multi-Geo. In the case of Multi-Geo, we'll go some more deeper because it's a new technology or new capability that we have been enabling. So we'll go a little more deeper into what is that and how can we leverage those capabilities.
Anybody using Multi-Geo or looking at it? Oh, awesome, cool, nice.
So we are expecting a lot of feedback from you, and let's get started.
Although he's sitting close, is that to hit us? All right, Josh, good luck.
Okay, good. So as you all know, the data explosion is happening over the world, right? So there is a huge amount of data being created within the enterprises from the consumer and across the world. So as the data growth is happening, there is a lot of concerns or considerations have been happening from across the globe, especially from the different countries. Whether this data, can we share this data, right? Should we share this data? Should be where we store this data? All of these concerns we are hearing from across the world. So in general, this kind of concerns are good from a local economic point of view because data is now considered kind of a commodity that can be shared. People start selling that. So there are a lot of things that are happening with the data, right? So this become a interesting problem for all the technology companies. And then Microsoft, we are looking at this from Office 365. And today's discussion is mostly focusing on how we store data, how we process the data, and then how we're going to be enabling you to share this data, right? So there are many reasons for this. One is, as I mentioned, there is a local economic considerations, and also there are privacy-related aspects. That is why people may want to be keeping the data locally, right? So we will today, from an Office 365, we will look at how we have multiple geolocations in the world where we store the customer data. We will define what is customer data, and then we will also talk about multi-geo, especially in the case of global companies. So let's get started. So before, let me get into the discussions. Let me ask you, did you hear from your business policy decision makers and the legal counterparts, means the data, where the data is being stored, especially for example, from an Office 365, where this data is stored? Did you hear this kind of questions from your colleagues? Yeah, there is a lot of, we hear also the same thing from a lot of our customers that there is a lot of concern is happening where the data is getting stored. Second question also, because most of your companies are going to be very global, because you have your main company may be in one location, maybe in Europe, your subsidiaries may be in US. So you need to think about how these employees or your customers going to collaborate, right? You need to think about, you need to adhere to the laws and regulations of USA. At the same time, you need to make sure that the people can communicate and collaborate easily, right? So I think that may be another scenario I believe that is happening across the world. So today, let's get into these problems, and then what Office 365 is doing. So as we know, Office 365 is the SaaS platform, software as a service platform, built on top of Microsoft Azure and also Microsoft Network. So this is we have around 100+ data centers across the world in 40+ locations. And there are 15 Geos. Geos are mainly for data at rest considerations. So we have around 15 Geos have been enabled across the world. So we have been working hard to make sure that we are compliant. We have leadership in the compliance. So as you know, especially in this case, European Union model clauses and other many standards we have been enabling. So in addition to that, from fundamentally, our design principle is by secure by design, right? So we have been following all the required security from physical, logical, and at the data layers. So we are making sure that all this have been adhered across these different geos. So as you can see here, as you can see in this slide, so we have around 11 geos across the world. Those are indicated by the orange means orange dots. And then we are announcing other geos, around 6 or 5 of them have been announced. This includes Germany, Norway, South Africa, Switzerland, UAE. So what mainly we are saying is that within this geo, we are ensuring that the customer data is going to be stored locally within the geo. For the people here, I think one of the regions that is already up and running here is with respect to us is European Union. So that region is where we are storing the data of customers from in this region. Then we have certain specific sovereign regions, geos are there. This is for US government, China, and Germany. These are special case data centers have been created. So when I talked about the customer data, there is we are talking about the 3 important assets or the workloads that we have. One is Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and OneDrive Business, right? From Exchange Online, we are making sure that the email body, the attachments, and the calendar entries are stored locally within the geo, right, where the user is. And the second thing is that for the SharePoint, the site contents and the files stored in the SharePoint is going to be locally stored. Then the OneDrive, the files uploaded. So then these are the contractually committed by Microsoft. Microsoft is saying that we are going to store their data if the data belongs to these categories within the region, within the geo where the user belongs to. So now the question you may be asking, how I know which workload is storing my data? So there are certain number of tools that are available. One tool is we call the data allocation. This is called data allocation map. So if you go to this tool, this is available in office.com/data maps. You can select which is the region belongs to. You can select the European Union here. Then you can see these different dots here indicating that these are 5 data centers within the European Union. You can select all other regions. And then if you scroll down in this page, you can see different workloads. Like, for example, case of Exchange, the SharePoint, and OneDrive is going to be in this European Union. What about the other workloads? So when you scroll down, you can see that other workloads may be in this region or maybe outside the region. You can see all the list of this information here. So if you look at this from a European Union point of view, so we have data centers in Netherlands, Ireland, France, Finland, and Australia. And if you look at from a contractually committed point of view, this data, for example, Exchange Online, OneDrive, and SharePoint Online should be stored within the European Union. And there are other workloads like Outlook, Mobile, Office Online, Dell. Those are also stored, except there are some exceptions there. For example, Active Directory. There are some attributes of Active Directory as being stored elsewhere, mainly to enable the multi-factor authentication and some other reasons. And there are some workloads, for example, Yammer or Sway, it is clearly indicating that the data is actually stored in USA, not in any of these geos across geos that we indicated. This is mainly to give you the transparency of where we store the data. So then there is another tool available to you. Once you subscribe to Office 365, right, there is an administrative console you have. Inside the administrative console, you go to the settings and organization profile. You can see the data allocation here. This is there are 4 workloads have been listed here: Exchange, SharePoint, Skype Business, and Teams. This is means real-time data based upon your tenant location. This data will be refreshed. This is important for you because when we create a new geo, for example, Switzerland is coming up. When a customer is going to be in Switzerland, right, when the geo is available, but the customer may be in European Union before, so we will move that customer eventually into Switzerland. So we want to know you may need to know where is that customer is now. If you go to the data maps, you will say there's a Switzerland region there, and these workloads are going to be in Switzerland. But there is a process. It will take some time for the customer to move from the existing region into the region they are supposed to be, depending on their address. So that is very specific information you can get from this data location card. We are looking for feedback on this. We are considering expanding this capability into add additional workloads that we are considering. If any feedback, we would like to hear from you. So this is another tool you can use. And also we talks about this all built on Microsoft Network. This is a quick slide that talks about our fundamental principle is that you need to get into Microsoft Network as early as possible in your experience. So that will give you the better experience for if you start using the Office 365. So we have around 130 edges, 2,700 ISPs partners, right? So it's a global network. And it's around 2 million miles long fiber cable is available from Microsoft Global Network. It is almost the same as going to moon 3 times and coming, 3 times and coming back. So that huge is the network, and it's keep on growing. So make sure that we get into this network as early as possible. So then there is another concept that we called Move program. This is interesting when we have a new geo is being created. For example, Switzerland is being created. We will eventually move your customers who has address in Switzerland into that specific geo, and then make sure that data for those customers addressed in there. But there is a program called Move program that is available from the tenant admin portal I mentioned earlier. You can go and then request you want to get a privilege of moving into that region. So those kind of programs are available from the tenant admin portal so that you can make the request to move to that country faster. So now let's talk about the scenario where we were talking about the global enterprise, right? You have you are a global customer. You have your satellite office in USA, Australia, like that. How are we going to enable this? Currently, we have 3 options, right? Before Multi-Geo. Multi-Geo is available now. Before we can build on-premise servers in different locations. You can preserve the data there so that we follow the regulatory guidance of that specific country for those employees. Then you have the hybrid architecture where you can Office 365, and then you can still have the on-premise servers in different places, right? Then the other approach is that you can have different Office 365 tenants for different subsidiaries or branches. So this approach is not scalable, especially from the point of view about it's very complex. First of all, sharing data and then communicating between these different systems is normally complicated and then making it work is extremely difficult. So that is why we decided to build and enable the multi-geo in Office 365. We still have a single tenant, right? Within the single tenant, you can decide on which users to be in which geo. For example, in a company with 3 subsidiaries in Europe, Australia, and USA, you can decide on which users should be in the USA, and all their data is going to be stored in USA. For those people who are in Australia, the data is going to be stored in Australia. So this is enabled. You don't need to make much changes to your system. Brian will take you to how this can be enabled. But a single tenant in Office 365 enables this capability. We are in a phased model. Means enabling this capability. Currently, we have phase 1 is available. That is enabling OneDrive and Exchange. For example, your user has data for the OneDrive and Exchange is going to be stored in that. If you configure that multi-tenant for that user, multi-geo for that user, that is going to be saved in that specific country for that user. Then we are enabling, soon this will be available. Currently it is private preview. Soon this will be available for general availability. This is for Office 365 groups and SharePoint. Whenever you create a SharePoint site, this is a shared resource we call. you can specify which geo that SharePoint site to be created, and then the content of that site will be stored in that geo. Right? So this is the phase by phase we are rolling out. We are looking for your feedback on what other workloads you consider to be in this in the next phase. So any feedback on that will be also welcome. So now this is an example of a multi-geo. In this case, Condoso is a global organization with around 25,000 users. 15,000 users are in USA, Europe, 5K, and Australia. So you can configure that like that. All the USA data is going to be in USA, the data centers in the USA, and Europe users data will be in Europe. So currently, we are enabling 10 geos where you can pick and select which user belongs to that area, then you can enable those capability. So this is the illustration of Condoso.com. So by enabling this, what we are providing you is the data at rest. But still, you can look for example, calendar entry or the calendar availability of a user, means he is available or not. USA user can able to search Australia users availability, right? So that collaboration scenarios still continue to work. That is the most benefit of this capability. So one thing you need to be careful about is that multi-geo isn't for these three areas. For example, GDPR compliance. GDPR talks about data residency. It talks about other things. Data residency is where your data is stored. So that is what we are talking about from a multi-geo. Second thing is that pinning to a specific data center. It is not to a data center, it is to a geo. For example, European Union, we have 5 data centers. Data centers are created for failover, fault tolerance kind of capability. We are pinning the data to that geo. That is another important thing. Performance benefit, this is a lot of questions we receive when enabling multi-geo. Are we getting multiple performance? It depends on your network configuration, because if an Australian user, if the network is going to get into the Microsoft network, they can configure to connect through the Europe, then the performance is not going to be much advantage. So as I was mentioning, we need to make sure that you get into the Microsoft network at the close to your user. That will give you the much better performance, not directly from the multi-geo. So there are already customers. There are already customers here too are enabling multi-geo. We are looking forward for the feedback, and also we expect that this is going to grow, because as more and more workloads come into picture, I think this is going to be more interesting for us. So the pricing and licensing. So there is a $2 per user per month for the users in the satellite geo. So that is one additional licensing or the pricing model. There are some constraints on the who can get the multi-geo. Currently, we need an enterprise license, enterprise agreement with the 2,500 means 2,500 users must be there, and among them, around at least 5% of the users should be in the satellite geo. Right, that is around 125 users should be signing up for multi-geo to get this functionality. So this is current model. This is going to change as we go along over the years, right? And this is available for all the SKUs you can think about, and all the workloads currently will get added into this $2 license, the monthly fee as we progress, right? So that is mainly from the high level. Now we will get into some specific aspect of multi-geo. Brian will take you and then also explain some of the technical aspect of this. Okay.
Thank you, Joshi. All right, so let's talk a little bit about essentially what happens when you purchase multi-geo to the point where you can start using it, what it looks like. And to be honest, as we were going through, and my first involvement with multi-geo for Office 365 actually started back in 2015. And we GA'd in April of 2018, so it's almost time for a birthday cake. And it was a long road to get to where we are today, and we've been playing with this for quite some time. So the quick overview, and then we'll kind of dig into what each of these things mean, is essentially, as mentioned, it's an add-on feature. So it is a set of licenses that you have to purchase, and they will show up. And what happens when you purchase those is when those licenses show up in the tenant, you can see them in your subscription list. That kickstarts a number of processes on our side that then goes and start to configure your tenant to make it multi-geo capable. Not every tenant out of the door is able to use the feature. There's actually a bunch of work we have to do behind the scenes to provide that functionality to each tenant. So every customer takes a slightly different amount of time. There's a decent amount of work behind the scenes that we have to do. We can talk more about that. But once the tenant is configured, we really tried to engineer this to be probably one of the most boring features because we just want it to work. We don't want users to have to think about how to use it, or administrators to think too much about how to configure it. And it's generally speaking, just a few attributes or a single attribute on the user level you have to manage to actually get things where you want them to be. And we're going to go through what those look like. So as mentioned, if you purchase the licenses, they're going to then show up inside your tenant as the multi-geo capabilities in Office 365. If you're more of a fan of PowerShell, like myself, you'll see it named a little differently. It'll be all in capital letters, Office 365 _ multi-geo. That's just the internal name for the license. This is the one that you see on the external side. And when that happens, when they show up, as I mentioned earlier, Azure AD, SharePoint, and Exchange start to do some things behind the scenes. Where on the Exchange side, what we're actually doing is very interesting. It's actually an Active Directory migration from one forest to another forest. So in the architecture of Exchange Online, if you were to think about it, every tenant gets a single account forest, and they also get a resource forest. And we actually put you into something we call a global account forest that is part of the multi-geo feature in Exchange Online. It takes us a little while to get you in there, depending on how many users and groups and links there are between all the different objects in AD. And then we assign you a number of different resource forests, one per geo. SharePoint, they can't do everything automated because it's actually the customer's responsibility to provide them a per geo access URL. So if your URL today in SharePoint was contoso.sharepoint.com, you might create a Contoso NAM or a Contoso UR, and each geo that you have has a slightly different URL for accessing and administration. So you'll start to see these down in the bottom right corner there. That's what Exchange Online would look like if you have one of these tenants. You can use the get organization config and look at what we call allowed mailbox regions, and you'll notice that we have here, actually this list needs to be updated because India is not listed there. We released India to everybody in December last year. You can just kind of see here what we call a geocode followed by a resource forest in Exchange Online. And those the three-letter codes in the beginning, like the NAM, UR, APC, those will be important in something we call the preferred data location that we're about to talk about. So end-to-end, our target, we try to get everybody configured in about 30 days. And that's from where the licenses show up. I will tell you very honestly that the larger the customer is, we might go a bit beyond the 30 days to get you enabled in Exchange. It takes it's a pretty complex process behind the scenes. But SharePoint and OneDrive you can use pretty much right away. So as we were going through and we introduced new geos, as Josh, you mentioned, we got 4 or 5 new geos that we've announced. Our intention is every time a new, what we call a Go Local geo is spun up, we want to put multi-geo there. And every week, multiple times a week, right, now that we've made these public announcements of other data centers that we're going to deploy, we get constant calls. Is such and such going to be in multi-geo? When will multi-geo be in this country, and that country? And the answer that I want to tell everybody is like as soon as possible. That's our goal. But the reality is, where we're moving customer data across the globe and increasing latency between different locations in their tenant, we have to do some validation on our side to make sure that there's nothing we have to change on our infrastructure to ensure you get a good quality experience when we go and enable multi-geo in one of these other locations. So you might have heard recently we announced the availability of Azure services in the South Africa data centers with Office 365 to come later. So that'll be one of the next ones that we're looking at to make sure that the facilities have a acceptable latency between all the other Microsoft data centers for multi-geo to work. And if they don't, then we've got some tricks up our sleeve that we can provision some hardware there to ensure that we can get multi-geo there and make it work very well. But our goal is to make it available in all of our worldwide geos. It's just a matter of us doing the troubleshooting and ensure that it's going to work right. What we will do when we light one up, as we did for India back in December of 2018, is we will just automatically give it to you. You don't have to come to us and say, hey, can I have India? Or when the other ones that are coming, you don't have to come to us and say, can I have X? Can I have Y? We will just add it to Exchange. You'll get it immediately. And then when you decide to, you can start configuring users to use that Geo. SharePoint, again, you don't have to ask them. You'll just be able to go in and say, hey, you know what? I want to start using that one. Type in a URL that you want to use for that location, and it'll be made available to you. Again, you're not going to have to come and ask us to turn it on. We'll just add it to the list of everything that's available for you to use. So the key attribute when we talk about user-attached data is something we call the preferred data location. And this is an attribute that contains those 3-letter codes I mentioned on the earlier slide. And each one of those codes corresponds to a geo. This field is what you'll assign to the users to determine where their content should be. So if I spun up a tenant in the European Union geo by default, that's considered my home tenant or my default tenant. You'll see other connotations like default mailbox region is another thing it might be called, Exchange Online, and that's where everybody would be. But then you go and apply Multi-Geo to the tenant, you buy the licenses. If I wanted to move 15 people to South Korea, you would come in and you would configure their preferred data location value to be KOR. And then behind the scenes, Exchange would start to initiate mailbox moves from European Union geo to the South Korea geo. And then that's that. Exchange just moves stuff on the fly. We are moving 10 million mailboxes a day, every day in the data center as part of our normal maintenance. So all of your mailboxes here, if they're in Exchange Online, we are constantly shuffling them around for maintenance and operations. And we use the same process to move those mailboxes across the geo boundaries themselves. Now, setting this value is a little interesting because if you're a customer using Azure Active Directory Connect to do a directory sync, for any synced object, you have to set this value on premises and then allow it to flow up into Azure AD Connect. In fact, Azure AD Connect or the MSOL PowerShell module will prevent you from setting this field if it's a synced object. It'll say no can do. So you'll have to tell Azure AD Connect to sync this attribute. And it was just recently added. Before, you had to choose a custom attribute of your choosing and use a transformation rule to say, hey, I want this attribute to sync into PDL in Azure AD. However, if you've deployed the Windows Server 2019 Active Directory schema, there is now the MSDS preferred data location attribute that you can use. So you can just do a one-to-one mapping, and it's perfect. We actually ran out of custom attributes with Microsoft, so we decided it made a lot of sense to go and add this to the official schema so that not just us, but everybody else can use it. The version of AD Connect you need or later is listed there. I believe that version was released in like May of 2017, so you'd have to have a pretty old version to not be able to use Multi-Geo. Let's see. We mentioned this, mentioned that. The other thing that sometimes trips people up is the PowerShell module. So if it's a cloud-only object and you're using the MSOL module, there's a couple different versions out there you'll notice. There's like a version 1 branch and a version 2 branch, where version 1 is like the stable release and 2 is the preview. You actually need the version 1 version to be able to use set MSOL user with the preferred data location value for any cloud-only objects. And then when you set that field, it syncs into something we call forward sync on our side. It then flows into all the different workload directories so that the workloads can take action on it. So if you can actually see, if you have an Azure AD PowerShell open and an Exchange Online PowerShell open at the same time, you can set it on the Azure side and sit and refresh the Exchange side. And usually within 5, 10, 15 minutes, you'll see the attribute flip. So we've got a few different scenarios that users typically come from. So if it's a new user that is just hired at the company, you've not provisioned a mailbox or a OneDrive library to them yet, and when they do get provisioned, you want to avoid something we call the double hop migration, which is you want them to just be provisioned in the geo of your choice and not in your home geo. So if I hire somebody and my tenant's default geo is the European Union, but I'm hiring somebody that's going to work in Australia, then this is the process that I have to take. Essentially, at the same time I assign them a license or before I assign a license that's going to provision a OneDrive library and an Exchange mailbox, you would set that PDL value to where you want them to be. So for Australia, that would be AUS. You would set that value, and then assign the license, or set the value in and assign the license at the very same time. And the provisioning systems on our side would say, oh, this user is supposed to be located in Australia, provisions the content in Australia. Now, if you happen to forget and you didn't put it there, that's okay. You can set it after the fact and still move the content where it should be. But it saves you some time to set up the value in advance. Now, if you're coming from on-premises with users that already have content, and you're moving their content into Exchange Online or OneDrive for Business, same thing. So if you set the value ahead of time, when you go to move those user-attached storage objects up, we will look at the PDL value and say, aha, this is supposed to be a mailbox that is stored in United Kingdom. They set it to GBR. We'll move it into the United Kingdom or any other geo that you might specify. Now, on the users that are already in the home geo, so your customer that's been in Office 365, a lot of your employees are there, and suddenly you have some new data residency regulations you need to adhere to, so you purchase Multi-Geo. Then it's a matter of setting the PDL on the user. Exchange will start those migrations behind the scenes. There's a handy URL here, aka.ms/mailbox-migration. There's a table in there, which actually we'll show here, that tells you for the size of the mailbox, and when we say mailbox, that could be their primary mailbox, it could be their archive mailbox. It's not a combined value, so it's not like primary plus archive. So if they've got a primary mailbox that's 10 to 50 gigabytes in size, generally we would say about, if you set 100 users that size, half of them should finish within about 3 days, and about 90% of them should finish within about 30 days or less, typically speaking. And what I usually tell customers that have purchased Multi-Geo, that if you get past that 90th percentile, that's when it's usually worth opening a case with us to say, hey, I set that value 40 days ago and it hasn't moved yet. Can someone take a look? And there's some stragglers that sometimes we'll find. There's some weird logical corruption in the mailbox that just needs some help pushing it over. But generally speaking, what we see is these will finish within the timeframes that we've got listed here. Over 200 gigabytes not supported because we just don't go that big. So you might say, well, I have an auto-expanding archive. I think maybe it's 300 or 400 gigabytes in size. Why does that say over 200 is not supported? Because in the auto-expanding archive world, it's actually made up of different mailboxes that are stitched together. And underneath the covers, they're all less than 200 gigabytes in size. And those will all move independently. In fact, a user's primary mailbox and their archive mailbox won't necessarily complete at the same time. They could complete at different times, and that's okay too. If I move back one slide here, though, OneDrive for Business is a little different. So for OneDrive for Business, you actually do have to initiate a PowerShell commandlet to start the migration of their library from their current geo to their desired geo. There's a lot of reasons behind this, but the primary one is that when they kick it off at first, it actually puts their OneDrive library into a read-only state. So while they're doing the relocation of their metadata from their current geo to the desired geo, they will lock the library to read-only. If they're making changes on their laptop and they've got the OneDrive sync and, client on there, that's fine. They can keep working with the files. It'll just say, oh, hey, I've got some uploads pending. And then when the metadata is migrated, they then go back to a read-write state, and those uploads will ship off their device back into OneDrive. It's not a long time, but they did keep it a manual process for now, so that you could kind of schedule it to happen during the user's most typical off hours to initiate the OneDrive relocation. So it might be a little hard to see, but let's see if I can figure out our zooming tools here. That's a little better. Look at that, get on the first try. So a user that has just recently had their preferred data location value changed, what we see here at the top is we're setting their PDL, so this is a cloud-only object, so we're setting it in the MSOL module. If it was a synced object, you'd have to change it on premises and let it sync up. So we're changing their PDL value to EUR, so European Union. And down on the bottom, we're looking at the Exchange Online PowerShell module, where we can see their mailbox is currently in a North America database, and we've just changed it to EUR. So essentially, when we made that change up top, we essentially start the timer. And if you were to look at that table on the slide before, that's when you start counting, right? Okay, so we made the change. We could see this mailbox perhaps is 50 gigs in size. I should expect it to complete somewhere within this time frame. So when you change the value, there's another value that I don't show on the screen here called mailbox region last update time. And that essentially gives you the timestamp of when you change the attribute. Keep in mind that it goes from preferred data location to mailbox region. Exchange Online uses a slightly different name for the same value. So it is the same attribute. All right, OneDrive. So start SPO user and content move. That is the commandlet that you use to initiate the relocation of the OneDrive library. So as we mentioned earlier, Exchange does it on its own. There's nothing you have to run to start the mailbox relocation. OneDrive, you will have to come in and run these commandlets to start the relocation itself. You can do it in a validate-only mode if you want to, and it'll basically tell you, yes, this would work. And then you can run it in the normal mode. They also have additional parameters here, which we have documentation online, that they are essentially allow you to schedule the desired start and end times. And we will try to get the metadata relocation done within that endpoint so that the read-write window is kind of off hours from when the user is actually working. Roughly speaking, 4,000 moves a month is what they suggest you don't go over. And as they happen and complete, essentially you can start kicking off more and more. And again, it's typically on the order of minutes. It's not hours or anything like that the library is in a read-only state. It is relatively quick. And then what happens is there's multiple phases where the metadata relocation takes place from the OneDrive library. And then behind the scenes, we're doing an Azure blob storage relocation as well. So once the OneDrive goes from read-only to read-write, the metadata relocation is finished, and then we're doing the Azure blob storage migration behind the scenes after the fact, but the user can keep using their content and making changes at that point. Currently in the UI, there's a single report, and what this report is currently reporting on is the value of PDL per geo. So I will tell you very honestly that this report is not currently telling you the actual location of the storage. It is showing you what you want it to be, because it's reporting on the preferred data location value. So we're doing some investigation right now on perhaps adding additional reports that will not just tell you what you want it to be, but what it actually is, so that you can go and tell your internal regulators and such, like, here's a report that shows that all these people working on that project that has to be in this location, that is where their OneDrive content and Exchange content are. And helping you kind of find folks that perhaps somebody forgot to run the OneDrive commands, and now their mailbox is in one location and the OneDrive is in another location. Like, that is not considered a long-term supportable configuration. They should be in the same place. What we tell folks is that it's okay for them to be in different locations for the duration of time it takes to complete the migration, but then they're supposed to be in the same location. Because it really doesn't make sense to say, Brian is under a data regulation that requires his content to be in North America only for his mailbox, but the OneDrive can be like anywhere else. Like that, how does that work? I don't understand how that could apply correctly. So you do want to make sure you go back and run the OneDrive commandlet to put them into the right place. Now, coming very soon, you'll notice it says coming in the first quarter of calendar year 19. How many days are left of that quarter? Not a lot. It's coming. It's very soon. We were hoping to tell you something today, but we can't quite tell you something today. But SharePoint and Office groups for 365 are coming to Multi-Geo. It's not going to be an additional cost if you're already subscribing to Multi-Geo. We're just going to give them to you. And you're going to be able to locate SharePoint sites in different geographies. You're going to be able to locate Office groups in different geographies. Essentially what it comes down to is the person that creates the group or creates the site, whatever their preferred data location is set to when they create it, that is where the site or the Office group will also go to. So if I create an Office group and my preferred data location is set to Canada, the group will get created in Canada as well. They can be moved after the fact. Administrator can do an administrative option to move them, but by default, they're created in the location of the user creating them. All right, let's see. You know what, let's risk it. Give me a second here. Who likes to tempt fate? Okay, so I've logged into one of our tenants that's been enabled for Multi-Geo. It's also been enabled for SharePoint for Multi-Geo. So what are we going to do? We're going to go into the SharePoint Administration Center. And I do have slides to back this up if it fails miserably for me. Live demos of beta code, always good. And what you're going to notice here is a couple things. First, I want to point out, up here in this dropdown, you'll notice that there's now a North America. And if I click this, you can see there's another number of geos here. These are the geos that the administrator has actually gone and added to the SharePoint/OneDrive configuration to enable. So what we're going to do, though, is we can see they're not all here yet. So we're going to come down to geolocations. And all the ones that are kind of lit up are the ones that we currently have created, and we're administrating the one that's currently in blue here. You know, like this, for example, let's change over here to EMEA. And what you'll also potentially notice, if you can see it, is that the URL changes. You can see there's a different URL name up top, and there's a different admin endpoint for each one that you create. So let's go to geolocations. And while we're doing that, let me just open up the mailbox for this user in the background. So let's add a location. And it's going to give me a list of the locations that we have not yet added. So well, let's add France. They're nearby.
I see the UK is outside Europe there, isn't it?
I'm not making any political statements about anything going on in this area. I would like to keep my job. So we're just going to say Contoso demos F, because that's the name of this tenant, France. And you can see it gives me URLs on what they're going to be. So we're going to click Add. We're going to say a prayer. OK, so it started in the background. Now, if we come over to our mailbox, we should soon, usually within a couple seconds, but now that we're all staring at it, it's not going to. Eventually what will happen is we'll get an email, and the email is going to say, I'll show you a copy of it while we wait. The email would look like this. You know, essentially saying, all right, you know, thanks, we got your request. We're going to start that configuration in the process, in the background, sorry. And then usually within 5, 10, 15 minutes, your next email is going to then say, oh, and we're done. Like we've set up, you know, the SharePoint location in that additional geo. So if we pop back here, let's see if we got lucky while we're showing that. There we go. So that's the one we're talking about. We've started the location, then within a few minutes it would come back and say, we've already set it up. And in fact, I wonder if any of the old ones are in here. They're not at the moment. It's going to show you that it's usually within 10, 15 minutes. But that's it. That's all it takes to turn on a whole nother geo for SharePoint. And you know, you would come in here in a few minutes and see that France is lit up. You would be able to pick it from here. And then the other nice thing is you can actually go in on a per geo basis if you want to, and do things like different sharing policies. So if you've got a subsidiary in a particular geo where they just have they desire to have a much more strict sharing policy, you could do that. You can come in here and set France to be, you know, least permissive if you want to, while another geo is a different value. So you can have different sharing policies in different sites. The other thing you can do too is, like on your sites, and again, this is all the stuff that's not quite released yet, so you can't play with this yet if you have Multi-Geo today. You can actually, so you can see here we have a European legal hub, so that's our hub site. You could actually go into a different location. I think North America's got some. And go to our active sites here. And let's just click big wins here. Now, even though it's already associated with hubs, let's pick a different one. How about Canada? No, that is a hub site. Third time a charm? There we go. So even though we're on the North American SharePoint location, we could still come in here and associate any of these sites to a hub site that's in a different geography. So if you wanted to have one central hub site for, you know, sales wins or something here, but you wanted to have all the different geography sites roll up into that hub site, you can do that. Doesn't matter where they are. You can still put them in one hub site. Oh, come on. I want that to come in so you don't think I'm a liar. Started. That's OK. We'll come back at the end. Let's see here. Where should we go? We talked about that. You can also do different data loss policies. So come back over here. Actually, I'm going to rely on the slides because I'm not that strong in that area, to be honest with you guys. But if you want to do geo-specific DLP policies, you can do that as well on the SharePoint side. So if you want to go and have different rules depending on where these folks are, by all means, go for it. You can also define different e-discovery managers. So if you've got a company that's got different groups of legal folks in different areas that are doing searches on just a certain sites, and you don't want to have control of all the sites in your organization, you could limit them this way. And we got the hub site here, I think that we already showed. And if we come a little further, the other nice thing too is like even the mobile client. So if you're running SharePoint Mobile, you start adding the different sites and different geos to the hub sites, they'll all show up in here as well. So the mobile client itself is multi-geo aware. And let's see, here we are so far. So as I mentioned, we only have days left of Q1, and we are still on target to deliver SharePoint sites and Office 365 groups. And as mentioned earlier, if you want to give us suggestions on what you want the next phase to look like, what do you want phase 3? What are the hot items that you're using that you wish had multi-geo capability? Let us know. We'd definitely like to take that feedback. And I've got a couple of PowerShell sessions open up here if you want to just kind of see some other stuff. All right, so you'll notice in the, let me see if I got a magnifier installed. When you go through our documentation to set up OneDrive and eventually SharePoint, you're going to see that we have you, set up those URLs. What the URLs are actually getting set up to do, oh, it's in full screen mode. Well, oh, you don't see me anymore. Sorry. Here we go. So when you go, and actually, let's run this right now, because I just added France, right? Is it there yet? There it is, the top. So it is behind the scenes setting up France for us, and you'll see, it gets listed in this MSOL company allowed data location. This area here is strictly for SharePoint and OneDrive. Exchange doesn't use that whatsoever. We would actually bump over here to an Exchange Online PowerShell session and get organization config, not organizational, config, mailbox region. Oh, there we go, timed out. Use my token. And here, essentially, we should see that allowed mailbox regions is full of all the different geos. And really, all of these are internal for us. These are just our resource for us behind the scenes. So when you assign a geocode to one of your users, if you assign North America, they get put into something we call NAMPROD12. And up top here, you can see all the users in this tenant. You can look at the database they're in, what region they should be in. So it's good when this matches the beginning of the database, because that says that the mailbox has moved to the appropriate location. This is also how you would go back to that table and say, hey, it's been 4 days. Should this mailbox have moved yet? How do I know if it moved? Come in here and take a look at this value, and that will tell you if they've moved from North America to Australia or North America to the European Union, et cetera. This is the place to check that. And this is one of the things that we're hoping we can improve on the reporting side and give you something that might say, hey, you've got 100 people you want in Korea, but there's only 85 there yet, and then give you kind of a breakdown of here's the 15 that have not yet moved for one reason or another. And whoa, what happened? We lost our slide. But with that, let's see here. I think we've covered everything we wanted to. If you have not already talked to the Fast Track folks, so they're fully up to date on what Multi-Geo is, and if you're looking to sign up for it, but you're not quite sure what you have to do to get through it, they'd be more than happy to talk to you. Or if you're still looking at coming to Office 365 in the first place, what we see with Multi-Geo is that it actually unlocked a bunch of customers to be able to come up to 365. In the past, what would happen is they would say, hey, we have to meet these data residency regulations, and my tenant is already created, and there's no way for you to put stuff elsewhere. So they would just leave a lot of on-premises infrastructure in place in different countries, and they would leave people on-premises in those locations. But now that Multi-Geo has showed up, it's given them the opportunity to now migrate those users into Office 365, use Multi-Geo, put their data where it needs to be, and keep it there. I forget if we mentioned it earlier, but we will never move their data at rest outside of the geo that's been configured. Right, so we'll move it around inside the data centers that are inside that geo. So like the European Union ones, got 5 of them. We will be constantly moving mailbox copies and OneDrive libraries around in those data centers just for normal operational maintenance and upgrades and such. But we would never move it out to North America for the weekend to do some maintenance in the European Union data centers and pull it back. Like that's a customer promise that we will not break. So your data will stay within the geo that you have defined.
Can I ask a question?
Yep, absolutely.
We have people in Singapore
Okay.
who moved out of Multi-Geo.
Okay.
Went back to our default region in EMA because there was no guarantee that Japan or Korean data centers would not be used.
Would not be used.
Would not be used.
Okay.
So could be used.
Okay.
Let's put it differently.
Yep.
I know that the data centers are now in Hong Kong and in Singapore, but there was also word that it may be that if a data center in Japan would be made available, that it could also be moved to Japan, and that was what they didn't want.
Gotcha.
So is that a hard statement, or is that something that can be changed? Or I mean, it can also be used. I mean, if they say Japan is the data center that Japan uses, okay, fine, and it will only stay in Japan. But there's also a guarantee or some word that says Japan data centers will not be used for APC.
No.
Okay.
So now APC is an interesting one because it's inside of APC, we also have Japan and Korea as go local geos. So if you told me I only want to use Japan, we could do that, right? We've got multiple data centers in Japan. But if we're looking at the greater Asia Pacific geo, and if you said, look, I only want to use Hong Kong, I have users that need to remain on Chinese soil, we can't do that. That's not a possibility. Same thing, we've had folks that say, hey, we don't want to use the Malaysian data center for whatever reason. Can't do it. If you put APC as the user's preferred data location, they can and will be in any of these 5. If you wanted to limit it further, you could pick Japan or Korea if you wanted them to be physically in that area for one reason or another, but you can't come in here and say, I like 3 out of the 5.
Will it be the same for Europe, for example?
Yes.
We have Norway coming up. Germany, maybe?
Yep. So what would happen in that kind of scenario is, this being the EU, why is, on my screen here, it's a map. You guys get red dots. I mean, I feel like I need to spin this thing around and you can just stare at this. But, oh no, we broke it again. Oh, we're at the end. So, what the heck? It's the best map I've ever seen. See, that's how secure we are. We don't even show you where they are. But yes, it would be the same scenario. So you've got the 5 dots in the EU geo, but then if we release additional go locals, so say we've got the United Kingdom one, we've got the France one, then you can start to peel off into those if they're more appropriate for you. So, like we've announced, oh God, I hope I don't say something I shouldn't. We've announced Germany, Norway, Switzerland. I'm going to make you say it so I don't say the wrong thing. Right, so assuming that we can get multi-geo into those areas, if you then said, hey, we want to use Norway, you could only use Norway and it would not exit Norway. But yes, you're limited to the geo boundary itself, not the data center. Right. I think with that, that's all I've got. We've got 5 minutes left if we've got any more Q&A. Otherwise, Josh will do an interpretive dance.
How does it work for the Chinese then, if you have...
So how does it work for China? China is one of the 3 sovereign geos right now. So there's Office 361 China by 21 Vianet. There's Office 365 Germany, which gets confusing because we announced Germany, but this is the special Germany right now that they have out there, and US government. Those 3 cannot participate in multi-geo. So if you have a strong regulation that says, I've got a few thousand users in China and their content has to remain on Chinese soil, those users either have to be in Office 365 China, which is not connected to worldwide Office 365, or an on-premises server there. We can't link the sovereigns to what we call worldwide. So if we, like on this map, on this page without map, if I pick 21 Vianet down here, those are the two Chinese data centers that operate Office 365 China, but they're not part of Multi-Geo. They can't be used. They're entirely different authentication systems, directories. There's no linkage between them. Yes?
Can you set the scope of some administrator roles to only a certain geo area? So, for example, only European data can, or European administrators can only manage European users.
A question, if you couldn't hear it, was can we limit who is able to manage what essentially from a geo boundary? We're not introducing anything new, but you've already got Exchange role-based access controls out there, so you can use those. You can filter those down if you want to. We have tossed around the idea of making PDL one of the recipient search scope values for a custom scope in RBAC, so you don't have to manage like a distribution group that you put the people in. But RBAC would still be the way that we do it. It's just how you do it.
Looking from a OneDrive SharePoint perspective, so no Exchange.
I'm going to get outside of my technology expertise really quick if I try to answer that one. So I don't know for sure. I'm sure there's a way, I just don't know. Is there somebody else over here? Yes, sir.
Just to clear up, the customer needs an enterprise agreement with 2,500 seats.
Correct. Yes. So if you have, as 2,500 of the licenses Josh you mentioned earlier. So if we
5%, right? 5%.
yes, a 5% buy-in, and I know it's here somewhere. There it is. And it's those license types. Now, I mean, if you've got 2,499 users, I mean, I think deals are made every day. That's what I would say. I'm not going to make any promises, but I do my best to stay out of licensing discussions. But yeah, you need to be on an EA right now, and you need 2,500 folks that are these kind of license types with a 5% buy-in. We are looking at expanding potentially into the CSP market. Does that make anybody here interested, CSP sellers? So we're looking to see if there's a way that we can unlock that business. We haven't figured out a way on how to do that yet because minimums are very hard to enforce in the CSP world, actually. But we're looking at it. We'd like to give it to more people. And the 2,500 rule was really where it was still a very new technology. We were trying to make sure it worked really well before opening the floodgates to a lot smaller companies as well, because we know the uptake would be pretty high. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for your time. We'll hang out for a little while longer if you got some more sessions, but we'll clean up here so the next speakers can get in. Thank you.